Hi, I'm Matt Quoker. Think about this. In 150 years, every single person on the face of the planet will no longer be here. They'll pass away and die. My name's Matt Quoker. I'm here to ask people like you and me the questions they've always wanted to ask about death. It's raining, so we better head on inside to see what people have to say. Mia, Alison, hello. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having us.
Now, for me, I've been exposed to death for a majority of my life. When did you, Mia, first experience a form of death?
My grandmother passed away when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and that's the only death that I've been faced with where there's been a physical death. And even then it was spoken about very, I don't know if esoteric is the right word, it was spoken about she's flown off to heaven.
Yeah.
So that's really the only
Yeah.
kind of death we were exposed
Gone
to.
to sleep.
Yeah. No, flown off to heaven
Flown.
with angels. That's
Right.
what was the words were
Okay.
used, yeah.
Okay, and Alison, how old were you when you were first?
I would have been, I just got married, so 23 when my grandfather passed away, yes.
Okay, and was it talked about much? Were you involved much in the arrangements? Did you get a chance to say goodbye?
No, I didn't get a chance to say goodbye, which is a bit of a sore point with me, but I was very removed from that passing, and then my father passed probably 20 years later, so I was a bit more involved in that one.
Okay, and did everyone seem to gel together well and come together as a family unit? Or?
No.
So conflict?
Conflict, most definitely.
And with you, Alison, because you're obviously from
South Africa.
And over there with their funeral traditions, did you find that, is it very similar to any services you've been to here, or?
I haven't been to any services here, but all the funerals we've had in our family subsequent to my initial exposure to death have been relatively emotional and calm and very much saying goodbye. And
So not rushed? Just
no,
more
not
relaxed.
rushed,
That's
more expected, which I suppose is not really what you want to hear, but more of an expected. There were a few instances where we did get a bit of a surprise, which perhaps made it more emotional, but always really calm and loving and caring environments because it's already an emotional time that you're going through. So none of the conflict that Alison just mentioned.
Yeah. Because for me, I've actually, people grieve, every person grieves differently. So some people are sad, some people are shocked, some people get really angry. And that's often where sometimes these cracks can begin to show is when people's grief on the stages of grief is anger. So have you ever heard of the 7 stages or 8 stages of grief? That's a really good tool that I tell people to use, because it actually tells you where you're at, because it's like sadness, shock, disbelief, and then you can get the anger as to why did this happen? Why did it happen to me? Do you both have children, and have you both had children?
Yeah, I've got an 11-year-old.
You've got an 11-year-old, and
Yeah, I've got 2.
okay. And have you spoken to them about death and the whole concept of this mortality that is so taboo in today's arena?
I suppose in our household now, we're in a situation where we do have my husband who is ill.
Right.
And we have these stages where things are really bad, that there is this almost unwritten understanding that it might be 2 weeks, it might be 3 weeks, it might be a year. So what we found is that death became an uninvited guest at the dinner table. Nobody wanted to mention it. Nobody wanted to speak about it. So from my side, I didn't want to speak about it because I thought, what happens if my husband thinks I'm wishing him dead?
Yeah.
And then what I found out relatively recently is he didn't want to talk about it because he didn't want to upset us.
Right.
So it just became something we didn't talk about it, but it was hanging over our head.
Like a cloud, yeah.
Yeah, and it's terrible because some evenings when you're setting the table for dinner, I'm kind of thinking, I wonder if I should set the table for death because
The Grim Reaper.
correct, because it's there.
Yeah.
But when we had to have that serious conversation, we actually did then involve our kid in that, the 11-year-old in that
great.
conversation. So he's across it, he's aware of it. It was a bit emotional for him at first, but it's amazing how just having that initial conversation has relaxed the entire family. I'm not sure what it says about our family, right? But it has relaxed the entire family. And for him and his 11-year-old, I suppose he doesn't accept it. He's still too young to understand what the consequences are if anything does happen.
Yeah.
But for him, he's more relaxed with the conversation now.
But see, it's that expectation that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that dad isn't well. So instead of pretending that sugarcoating everything that when Dad may eventually pass away, this whole shock, because what I've experienced is adults who have been sheltered from the whole death concept. When they are confronted with it at an older age, I find that they don't cope. You know, I don't know if that children have better coping mechanisms than what we do as adults because we've got a larger understanding. Because see, like with me, I was always exposed to death and you know, from about 9. And it was freely spoken about. And we've got a European background, so for us it's, you know, don't talk about death because you're inviting death in the door. But I was, you know, we were very open about it. And for me, that's what sort of led to my interest in the industry and where I'm at the moment. But, you know, I see that with adults, they have this harder coping mechanism than what children do. Children often, as you say, may not understand the concept, but at least your 11-year-old now knows that mum and dad, you know what your husband wants. There's a clear line. And so in your experience, you know, when you've, you've obviously lost someone close to you, as you said earlier.
Yes, my husband.
Your husband. And did you, you know, were your children around me as kids' age?
No, my son was 24, my daughter was 21. So they knew Dad wasn't well, and they knew that it was terminal. When it was going to happen, we didn't know. Right. And it actually happened a bit quicker than what we had expected.
Okay, yes.
But they were old enough to understand the concept that Dad was going to eventually pass away. So, yeah.
Did you find with them being older that they were able to support you better emotionally, or did they retract? Like
my daughter retracted,
right.
Most definitely.
Right.
She's still not around today.
Right.
My son was there for me. I'm going to get upset now.
And you know what? That's okay. That's okay. And you know what it is? I'll say something to you, Alison. He may not be here, right? But you've got what's here and what's here. You've got, you know, your memories and what's in your heart. And, you know, I'm a firm believer. I don't know what there is, but there's something. And I say to, you know, I often say to people, you know, you'll get a sign. I actually had a lady the other week. She was in the car and she got quite curt with me and she said, I don't believe in that. And she rang me 2 days after the service and said, our wedding song has played on 3 separate occasions when I've gotten into the car.
Oh, wow.
And she said, I want to thank you.
You do get a sign all the time. I mean, he's been gone nearly 6 years now. I still get signs from him.
Good.
So
And he was the love of your life,
He
obviously.
was.
The love of your life and your best friend. And that's the hardest thing too. You know, often people who lose someone as close to them as what you have, decisions are made rather quickly. And I often say to families, you know, take time, 6 months, before you make any major decisions. You know, because I don't know if this was your experience, but did you find at the time you were surrounded by all these people, and then all of a sudden, you know?
Funny you should mention that, Matt. Yes, everyone comes out of the woodwork when someone passes away, and they're all there and they wish to help you. Yeah. To be honest, it's more of a hindrance sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. You're grieving as well, your own way.
Well, I'm grieving. I would just like to be left alone. But everyone is there to help. You're getting meals, you're getting people to offer to help you do things. And then probably, 4 6 weeks later,
they're gone. But with you, you know, and your kids, after the funeral, did you find that things were okay with you, or were you up and down like this giant roller coaster?
No, things were pretty good actually. My son still lived with me at the time, so he was always around. And my daughter has slowly come back into the family unit, which is lovely. But I had a couple of good friends who rallied around me, and they took me out and kept me entertained and busy, and so I didn't really have time to sit and dwell on what had happened.
That's good. I always love that scene. Have you guys seen Still Magnolias, the movie?
Yes.
Where she's standing and just, I just want to hit someone. She goes, here, hit her, hit Weezer Dubrow. And jumping back to you, Mia, you were talking about your 11-year-old son and your husband not being well. Do you have an understanding of what, you know, he wants and how things are going to progress? Because he'd like to see a family overseas, or...
Yeah, so when we finally had the conversation, because as I said, it's, you know, just hanging over. Because it's inevitable, unfortunately. It is what it is, right? So when we had the conversation, he's told us now what his expectations are and what he wants. So we know what that looks like now for him. And interesting, just having this conversation about what he wants and what the expectations are actually led to then the follow-up conversation to go, let's make sure the will is done. Let's make sure the documentation is in. let's make sure you know where all the passwords are. So it's almost like the life just became a lot
That's
easier.
fantastic.
So we now know, where all of that sits. But then the conversation was, okay, well, this is what he wants, and we have to respect his wishes. But from my side, I'm going, well, you know what, I've got a 11-year-old, he'll be 12 soon. I've got a 12-year-old to think about too. And what does goodbye look like for him, that he's not going to hate me for sticking to what my husband wants? And yes, we have family overseas too. And if I do what my husband wants me to do, my family overseas and his family are going to hate me forever, because they won't get a goodbye that they feel they want. So with COVID and what have you being here, it's acceptable practice now to have Zoom, online
Streaming services.
Yeah, correct, streaming services. So even though I know what he wants, I now realise that there's got to be a further conversation with the family and with my son to go, well, actually, what is it that you want? And we had that conversation afterwards to go, look, you're going to be dead, buried in the ground.
Yes.
You actually have no say.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's be honest.
And that's very true.
You have no say.
Yeah, that's right.
So if you don't mind, let us have a conversation.
Yeah.
And he then accepted it and went, look, whatever you need to have closure and to say goodbye, just go ahead and do it. But for my sake, I'm dead, I'm gone.
Well, that's a fantastic point, that funerals are for the living. It's for closure for the living. And as you said, I want to highlight the fact that you brought up the will, because see, in Australia, the executor is in charge of everything. So, I've experienced people that there's conflict in the family, and the person who is the executor is in conflict with the spouse, and then all of a sudden, the spouse has no say, the executor gets a final say. How do you feel about death now that you've experienced it, and you've experienced it in full, and this is something that may happen in the future? How do you both feel about it from when you were younger? Oh, he's
I used to be very afraid of
Yep.
death. I thought it was quite a scary thing.
Yeah.
But to have someone pass away in your arms, it's one of the most beautiful things.
Yeah. That's good. I can get a tissue out. There you go. It's a once in a lifetime experience, isn't it? Take your time.
It's very peaceful.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no pain.
Yeah. And that's the thing, when you see someone you love suffering, and then all of a sudden there's just that release.
It is. That's exactly what
It's
it
a
is,
release.
Matt. It's a release. To know that they're no longer in pain.
Yeah. That was like my best friend. She was in her 20s and she had osteosarcoma. And we were told that she was passing away. We ran to the hospital and she lasted another 10 days. And that 10-day period was just one of the most horrible times of my life.
Well, my husband had angiosarcoma and he was gone in 3 days.
Wow. Yep. And that's the thing. And when she did eventually pass, it was just this total release.
It was just...
She relaxed.
It was actually quite amazing to watch, to be honest, to see someone's... And I'll swear I saw his soul leave.
Beautiful.
It was...
And it does. I believe that too.
It was very ethereal, if that's the right word. It was just... It was amazing, but yeah, sad at the same time.
But you know what though? That's something that you've experienced that not many people do. And
No,
it's something that'll
I've
live
been
with
told
you.
that,
And it's
yeah.
something that's going to live with you for the rest of your life. You're very fortunate in that respect, I believe.
I feel I'm very fortunate that I was actually with him
A lot of people aren't.
when he did pass. Yeah.
A lot of people aren't. And Mia?
So from my side, I suppose when we think about death, we do believe that it's the soul just leaving the body, and it is what it is.
The body's a vessel.
Yeah, so even when we've had death in the family and experiencing death, it's been emotional in terms of sadness and stuff, but I've been able to remove myself from it anyway. The not having the conversation at home created a lot of fear and anxiety, and it was more a fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
And it was just having that conversation and laying it all out and understanding what it looked like and understanding all the steps that needed to be dealt with. Just having that conversation seems to have taken that fear away and has made it, it's a much better approach at the dinner table now, that we can joke about it and talk about it, and it's more of a friend now and an ally and a colleague versus just that grim reaper.
That's
you
right.
spoke
And
about.
you can get off your chest what you want to say. You've
Correct.
got a chance to have closure and talk about things, and you make things that you might want to be said that wouldn't normally be said.
Yes, correct. So we've just sort of tried to demystify it so that it's not
It's amazing.
a big fright and we're reacting at the time that it happens. So we still have one question though.
Yes,
This
what's
is
that?
a question we haven't had answered yet, so I think you're probably the best person
Please.
to speak to. So I have this fear that I'm going to wake up one day and there's going to be a dead body in the house.
Right.
And I have no idea what to do with the dead body. And I know I shouldn't laugh, but I'm thinking
No.
it's like...
No, it's all good. It's all good. Look. You know, it depends on circumstance. So you know, if palliative care is involved, usually a palliative care nurse would be contacted to pronounce death. Okay, and then a funeral director can be contacted, and then he'll be taken into care. You know, if there's a pre-existing illness evident, if someone just passes away suddenly, and the family have no idea and it's a shock, you know, it's basically the police are called, the ambulance is called. In the event there's no known, usually if there's no known illness, usually it becomes a coronial matter that the coroner gets involved, and then the deceased will go to the coroner, then the funeral director is engaged after that. So it just depends on the actual circumstances. So the police actually deem, I'm pretty sure the police are the ones who say this will now become a coronial matter, or it will be, it's pre-existing, it's just, you know, call your funeral director. So, you know, like in your instance, more than likely there'll be a stage that palliative care may be involved, and if palliative care are, then the palliative care will then instruct you what to do.
Okay.
And Alison, do you have a question?
Yes, I do actually. What I found very daunting was actually walking into a funeral home and having to deal with the service in a very clinical... I mean, they do their best to make it as understanding as possible, but it was still quite clinical. I would have loved to have known if there was a service where a funeral director could have come to the home.
Of course.
To discuss the service with my children and I.
Yeah. Look, usually that can be done, and there are providers out there I know that do have consultants that go to families' homes. However, you know, usually the family will do the due diligence, speak to them, feel comfortable with them, then ask the question when the time comes to make an appointment and make the actual funeral arrangements. So a lot of providers do funerals at home, but it's only usually once the family have made their decision on who they want to engage to look after their loved one. So, you know, but again, it's more of a recent thing, because funerals have changed, you know. Yes. They've definitely changed from when we were kids. Funerals are different, you know. A family may want, if they're a dancer, ballerinas at the service and things like that. That can happen today, you know. And as I said earlier, funerals are for the living. They're not for the one who's passed.
No, and that's exactly right.
So,
yes.
Ladies, I want to thank you so much for coming today and you know, sharing something that's very personal to you and very candid, and you're amazing, strong, fantastic women. So I want to thank you for sharing part of your life with me and the viewers, and take care and look after yourself.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. It's interesting to me. Death comes in many ways, shapes and forms. No matter how long ago someone passes away that you love, you still grieve, even if it's as long as 20, 30, 40 years ago. You've got Mia, who has this energy around her, and they've sorted it out, and they know what they want to do. That is an amazing aspect to have. To be able to have a voice whilst your loved one is still alive and know what they want and be able to honour their wishes. You've got people like Alison, who's lost their soulmate, and yet still, after all this time, she misses him to this day. I'm Matt Quoker, and this is Death Defined. Until next time.